Hey everyone, and welcome to Story Dose. This is where I sit down and I read a random book once a week for you guys and hopefully share something beautiful or thought-provoking or somehow inspire you guys to go out and read this stuff yourself. This is something that I do with my friends all the time. This is something that I've been doing for years and years, and it's always been like a really unique, quirky thing. And so whenever I got into content creation and being a podcaster and everything, it only makes sense if I am actually doing this with you guys too. So what we're going to do now is I am going to take 5 or 10 minutes, and I'm going to read to you a passage out of a selected book. This book is actually one of my favorite fantasy novel series of all time, even though the last book hasn't been released yet. It is Patrick Rothfuss's The Name of the Wind, the first book in the Kingkiller Chronicle. There's a specific passage, a couple pages out of this book, that I want to bring to you guys because it's beautiful and it really channels the energy that I hope to capture on this short segment each week. So, without further ado, let us read. Kothe held up a hand to keep Chronicler from writing and spoke. I've never told this story before, and I doubt I'll ever tell it again. Kothe leaned forward in his chair. Before we begin, you must remember that I am of the Ademaru. We were telling stories before Calypso burned, before there were books to write in, before there was music to play. When the first fire kindled, we Rue were spinning stories in the circle of its flickering light. The innkeeper nodded to the scribe. I know your reputation as a great collector of stories and recorder of events. Kothe's eyes became hard as flint, sharp as broken glass. That said, do not presume to change a word of what I say. If I seem to wander, if I seem to stray, remember that true stories seldom take the straightest way. Chronicler nodded solemnly, trying to imagine the mind that could break apart his cipher in a piece of an hour. A mind that can learn a language in a day. Kothe gave a gentle smile and looked around the room as if fixing it in his memory. Chronicler dipped his pen and Kothe looked down at his folded hands for as long as it takes to draw 3 deep breaths. Then he began to speak. In some ways it began when I heard her singing. Her voice twining, mixing with my own. Her voice was like a portrait of her soul, wild as a fire, sharp as shattered glass, sweet and clean as clover. Kothe shook his head. No. It began at the university. I went to learn magic of the sort they talk about in stories. Magic like Taborlin the Great. I wanted to learn the name of the wind. I wanted fire and lightning. I wanted answers to 10,000 questions and access to their archives. But what I found at the university was much different than a story. And I was much dismayed. But I expect the true beginning lies in what led me to the university. Unexpected fires at twilight, a man with eyes like ice at the bottom of a well, the smell of blood and burning hair, the Chandrian. He nodded to himself. Yes, I suppose that's where it all begins. This, in many ways, is a story about the Chandrian. Kothe shook his head as if to free himself from some dark thought, but I suppose I must go even further back than that. If this is to be something resembling my book of deeds, I can spare the time. It will be worth it if I am remembered, if not flatteringly, at least with some small amount of accuracy. But what would my father say if he heard me telling a story this way? Begin at the beginning. Very well, if we are to have a telling, let's make it a proper one. Kothe sat forward in his chair. In the beginning, as far as I know, the world was spun out of a nameless void by Aleph, who gave everything a name, or, depending on the version of the tale, found the names of all things already possessed. Chronicler let slip a laugh, though he did not look up from his page or pause in his writing. Kothe continued, smiling himself. I see you laugh. Very well, for simplicity's sake, let's assume that I am the center of creation. In doing this, let us pass over innumerable boring stories, the rise and fall of empires, sagas of heroism, ballads of tragic love. Let us hurry forward to the only tale of any real importance. His smile broadened. Mine. My name is Kothe. pronounced nearly the same as Kothe. Names are important as they tell you a great deal about a person. I've had more names than anyone has a right to. The Edem call me Medre, which depending on how it's spoken, can mean the flame, the thunder, or the broken tree. The flame is obvious if you've ever seen me. I have red hair, bright. If I had been born a couple hundred years ago, I would probably have been burned as a demon. I keep it short, but it's unruly. When left to its own devices, it sticks up and it makes me look as if I've been set afire. The thunder I attribute to a strong baritone and a great deal of stage training at an early age. I've never thought of the broken tree as very significant, although in retrospect I suppose it could be considered at least partially prophetic. My first mentor called me a leer because I was clever and I knew it. My first real lover called me Dulator because she liked the sound of it. I have been called Shadakar, Lightfinger, and Sixth String. I have been called Kothe the Bloodless, Kothe the Arcane, and Kothe Kingkiller. I have earned those names, bought and paid for them. But I was brought up as Kothe. My father once told me it meant to know. I have, of course, been called many other things, most of them uncouth, although very few were unearned. I have stolen back princesses from sleeping barrow kings. I burned down the town of Trebon. I have spent the night with Felurian and left with both my sanity and my life. I was expelled from the university at a younger age than most people are allowed in. I tread paths by moonlight that others fear to speak of during the day. I have talked to gods, loved women, and written songs that make the minstrels weep. You may have heard of me. Absolutely beautiful prose. If you guys couldn't tell by how he addresses everything in that, Patrick Rothfuss has a real way with words. He writes his prose almost like it is poetry or music, which is one of the things that makes the music that he writes in his book so effective. So make sure that you go pick up a copy of The Name of the Wind by Patrick Rothfuss. It is a thick one, so be ready for that. Be ready for the long haul. It's worth it, though. We'll catch you next time on Story Dose.